You walk past an Amish farmhouse in January. The snow is 2 feet deep. The chimney is barely smoking. Inside that house, it is 72 degrees. And it has been 72 degrees for the last 18 hours without anyone touching a single thing. You can take off your coat. You can sit on the floor. The boards under your feet are warm. No furnace, no baseboard heaters, no heat pump humming behind the house. The first time I walked into one of these homes outside Millersburg, Ohio, I spent 20 minutes looking for the thermostat. There wasn't one. Just a wall. A specific wall, built a specific way, $47 in materials. That's it. The Amish have known this for over 150 years. The rest of us pay the utility company $1,700 a year for heat that a dark painted wall gives you for free. And the worst part is that this technique was documented in a United States Department of Energy report in 1979, then quietly buried under newer regulations that made it almost impossible to retrofit unless you knew exactly where to look. What I'm about to share with you works in a house you already own, built before 1980, with no contractor, no permit, no one knocking on your door. Stay with me. The last piece of this came from a handwritten notebook, March 1923, Samuel Yoder, Holmes County, Ohio. Once you see it, you will never look at your south-facing wall the same way. Now, here is the part that nobody tells you. The Amish did not invent this technique. They preserved it. The original idea goes back to Roman bathhouses, then to French inventor Edward Morse, who patented the concept in 1881. Patent number 246,626, filed in Salem, Massachusetts. Morse described a wall that could absorb sunlight during the day and release that heat into a home for hours after the sun went down. The patent was largely ignored for almost a century. Then in 1964, a French engineer named Félix Trombe revived the concept and built the first modern version in a small village called Odeo in the Pyrenees Mountains. The wall worked so well that the homes in Odeo never needed conventional heating, even in alpine winters. Researchers from around the world traveled to study it. The United States Department of Energy funded studies in the late 1970s. Reports were written, diagrams were drawn, and then, almost overnight, the research stopped getting funded. The technique was labeled experimental and quietly removed from mainstream construction guidance. But the Amish never got that memo. They had been using a simpler, more rugged version of this idea since the 1860s, when communities in Lancaster County built their farmhouses with thick stone walls on the south side. They did not call it a Trombe wall, they did not call it anything fancy, they called it building the house right. Here is how it actually works. You take a south-facing exterior wall. You paint the outside of that wall a very dark color, almost black, using a heat-absorbing matte finish. Then you place a sheet of glass, or in the Amish version, a thin layer of glazed material about 4 inches in front of that wall. The space between the glass and the wall traps sunlight like a greenhouse. The dark surface absorbs the heat. The thick masonry behind it stores that heat for hours. As the temperature inside the house starts to drop in the evening, the wall slowly releases everything it absorbed during the day. A properly built wall like this can release usable heat for 10 to 14 hours after the sun goes down. In Lancaster County, where I spent 3 winters watching this in action, an Amish family of 7 kept their entire downstairs at 68 to 72 degrees from November through February, using nothing but the wall and a small wood stove for the coldest nights. Their fuel consumption was less than 1 cord of wood per winter. The average American home burns through 3 to 5 cords, or pays an equivalent in oil, gas, or electric heating. The reason almost no one has heard of this is not because it doesn't work. It is because it works too well, and it works without anyone billing you for it every month. Now you might be thinking, alright, this sounds great for someone building a new house from scratch with thick stone walls and southern exposure, but what about the rest of us? What about the people whose homes were built in 1962 with a frame wall, vinyl siding, and a furnace in the basement? This is where it gets interesting, because the Amish figured out something even more clever than the original Trombe design. In the 1920s, an Amish builder named Jonas Beiler from Gordonville, Pennsylvania, started experimenting with what he called a heat-catching wall. He could not afford to rebuild entire houses, and his community was growing fast. Young couples needed homes that could be retrofitted from older farmhouses or simple frame structures. Beiler took the Trombe principle and adapted it for existing walls. Instead of building a thick masonry wall from the ground up, he attached a heat-absorbing panel to the outside of the existing wall, then enclosed it with a salvage storm window or sheet of glass. The cost, in today's dollars, comes out to about $47 per wall section, assuming you source the materials secondhand. Total cost for an average south-facing wall on a single-story home between $40 and $70. The heat output, measured in real homes that were retrofitted using Beiler's method, was enough to reduce heating bills by 35 to 60% in the first winter. Let me explain exactly what you do, because this is the part where most people get scared off by complicated diagrams. You find your south-facing exterior wall. South, not east, not west. The sun has to hit it directly for at least 4 hours a day in winter. You measure the wall section that gets the most sunlight, typically a section about 8 feet wide and 6 feet tall. You take a piece of half-inch plywood or sheet metal cut to that size. You paint it with a flat black, high-absorption paint. There is a specific kind sold for wood stoves and grills that works perfectly and costs about $12 a quart. 1 quart covers the whole panel with 2 coats. You let it cure for 48 hours. Then you mount that panel to your existing wall using simple wooden furring strips, leaving about a 3 to 4 inch air gap between the painted panel and your house wall. Above and below the panel, you cut 2 small vents, about 4 inches by 10 inches, that pass through your existing wall into the room behind it. The bottom vent lets cool air from your room enter the air gap. The top vent lets the heated air flow back into your room. This creates a natural convection loop. No fan, no electricity, no moving parts. Finally, you cover the whole assembly with a sheet of clear material. An old storm window works perfectly, mounted about 2 inches in front of the painted panel. That outer glass traps the solar heat against the dark surface, and the dark surface heats the air in the gap, which rises through the top vent into your home. Cool air gets pulled in through the bottom vent to replace it. The cycle runs all day on its own, as long as the sun is shining. I watched a retired electrician in Holmes County, Ohio, install one of these on the south wall of his 1,958 ranch house. He spent $43 on materials. He did the whole project in a single Saturday afternoon. That winter, his propane bill dropped from $280 a month to $96 a month. He told me, and I quote, "I felt like an idiot for waiting 40 years to do something this simple." This is the part that should make every American homeowner pause. There is no permit required to attach an exterior decorative panel to your own home. There is no inspection required for a passive solar collector that contains no electrical components and no plumbing. The reason your contractor never mentioned this to you is because there is no profit margin in selling you a $47 wall that lasts 30 years and eliminates your heating bill. But here is where the story gets darker, and where the real reason this knowledge has been pushed to the margins finally comes into focus. In 1981, the Reagan administration cut funding to the Solar Energy Research Institute by nearly 70%. The institute had been the primary federal body studying passive solar techniques, including Trombe walls and the kind of retrofitted heat panels the Amish had been using for decades. The research did not stop because the technology failed. It stopped because the budget vanished. Within 5 years, mentions of passive solar retrofits disappeared from federal homeowner guides. By the early 1990s, the only organizations still actively documenting these techniques were small homesteading communities, a handful of university extension programs, and the Amish themselves. Meanwhile, the residential heating industry in the United States grew into a $200 billion a year market. Furnace manufacturers, fuel suppliers, utility companies, and HVAC contractors all benefited from a country that had forgotten how to heat a home with sunlight and a dark painted wall. The forgetting was not an accident. It was the natural consequence of an economy that rewards complexity and punishes simplicity. A 1979 Department of Energy publication, document number DOE/CS/0127, explicitly stated that retrofitted Trombe-style collectors could reduce annual heating costs in temperate climates by 40 to 70%. That document still exists. You can find it in federal archives if you know what to search for. It was never officially retracted. It was simply never republished, never updated, and never referenced again in any consumer-facing material from the federal government. The Amish have a saying that I heard repeated in 3 different communities. The world will tell you that the old ways are gone because the old ways were too good to leave alone. They knew. They watched modern America build itself a heating industry based on dependence, and they kept their $50 walls quietly absorbing sunlight year after year, generation after generation. Now, if you already own a house and you are thinking this only applies to people building from scratch, stay with me, because this next part is specifically for you, and it is the most important section of this entire video. The retrofit version of this wall does not require any structural changes to your home. You are not knocking down walls, you are not pouring concrete, you are not hiring a mason. You are attaching a panel to the exterior of an existing wall, the same way you would attach a piece of decorative trim or a satellite dish mount. The furring strips screw into your existing studs through your siding. The painted panel mounts to the furring strips, the outer glass mounts to a simple wooden frame. Total tools required: a drill, a saw, a level, and a screwdriver. The 2 vents that pass through your wall into the room are the only part that involves cutting into your house. Each vent is roughly the size of a brick. You can use a reciprocating saw or even a sharp hand saw to cut through drywall and exterior sheathing. The vents themselves can be simple metal louvers from any hardware store, about $8 each. You install one near the floor and one near the ceiling, both within the area covered by your exterior panel. If you have a south-facing wall in a bedroom, a living room, or a kitchen, this works. If you have brick or stone exterior, this works even better, because the existing masonry already has thermal mass. If you have wood siding, you can mount the panel directly over the siding without removing it. If you have vinyl siding, you simply install spacers behind the furring strips so they connect to the studs underneath. The single most important variable is sun exposure. Stand outside your house at noon in winter. Look at the south-facing wall. If the sun hits it directly without obstruction from trees or neighboring buildings, you are a candidate for this retrofit. If the sun is blocked, you can sometimes still benefit from a smaller installation on a southeast or southwest wall, though the heat output will be reduced by about 30%. I want to address the skepticism I know some of you are feeling right now. You are thinking, this sounds too simple. If it really worked, everyone would be doing it. That is exactly what I thought when an Amish carpenter named Eli Stoltzfus first showed me his version on a frigid morning outside Intercourse, Pennsylvania. I put my hand on the inside wall of his living room at 4 in the afternoon. The wall was warm, not hot, but warm enough that you could feel it radiating into the room, hours after the sun had started to set. He smiled at me and said, "The sun does the work, the wall remembers." The reason everyone is not doing this is not because it does not work. It is because the people who profit from your dependence have spent 40 years making sure you never heard about it. Now you have heard about it. The question is what you do with that knowledge. There is one more piece of this technique that I have not told you yet. It is the part that took me the longest to find, and it is the reason a properly built Amish heat wall continues working for decades, while a cheaper imitation fails within a few seasons. Before I show you what Samuel Yoder sketched in his notebook in March of 1923, one quick thing. Everything I have been digging out of these old DOE archives and these Amish farmhouses, the dark painted wall any homeowner can build for $47 on a south-facing exterior, the 4-inch air gap with the salvage storm window glazing, the upper and lower vents that create the natural convection loop with no fan and no electricity, the night cover I am about to walk you through, the Burkholder reservoir from the sand battery video, the smoke shelf from the Hans Herr video, the breath line from the $8 fix video, the buried clay jar from the cooling trench video, and all the other pieces I have pulled out of Lancaster County and Holmes County over the years. I have put it all in one place, room by room, season by season, in the order the families actually use it. It is called the Amish Home System. Link is in the description. But stay right here, because what Samuel Yoder wrote on a single page of a builder's notebook in 1923 is the one addition that takes overnight heat retention from 60% to over 92%. In a handwritten Amish builder's notebook dated March of 1923, attributed to a craftsman named Samuel Yoder of Holmes County, Ohio, there is a single page with a sketch and a brief note. The note describes what Yoder calls the night cover, and it is the missing piece that almost every modern attempt at recreating a Trombe wall gets wrong. Here is the secret. A heat-absorbing wall works beautifully during the day, but at night, that same wall works in reverse. The dark surface that absorbed heat all day starts radiating that heat outward, through the glass, back into the cold night air. By morning, you can lose up to 40% of the heat you collected during the day. This is the single biggest reason that modern passive solar retrofits underperform. They have no night cover. Yoder's solution was simple and brilliant. He built an insulated panel, essentially a thick blanket of straw and burlap sandwiched between two thin sheets of wood, that hung above the heat wall during the day on a simple rope and pulley system. At sunset, the family would lower this insulated panel down in front of the glass, sealing the wall behind a layer of insulation for the night. At sunrise, they would raise it again, exposing the dark surface to the morning sun. This single addition increased the overnight heat retention from 60% to over 92%. In modern terms, you can replicate this with a piece of rigid foam insulation, the kind sold at any hardware store for about $18 per 4x8 sheet, cut to the size of your collector, and mounted on simple hinges or hooks. You drop it into place at night, you lift it out in the morning. 2 minutes of effort, twice a day. The Amish family I watched in Lancaster County had upgraded Yoder's design to use a counterweight system similar to an old window sash, so that lowering and raising the night cover took less than 10 seconds. Their entire heat wall, including the night cover, cost them under $60 in materials. It had been operating continuously since 1987. That is 38 years of free heat from a wall that most contractors in America would not even know how to describe. The notebook was shown to me by Samuel Yoder's great-grandson, who now runs a small carpentry shop near Berlin, Ohio. He told me that his great-grandfather had learned the night cover technique from a German immigrant who had brought the idea over from a small village in the Black Forest, where families had been using insulated wall covers since the late 1700s. Yoder wrote it down because, in his words, on that 1,923 page, men forget what their hands once knew. The $50 figure I keep returning to is not a marketing number. It comes from a 2019 cost analysis done by a small builders cooperative in Holmes County, Ohio, who priced out the exact materials Samuel Yoder specified in his 1923 notebook. They found that for a wall section measuring 8 feet wide by 7 feet tall, you needed roughly $48 in raw goods. That figure included the dark stone or brick mass, the salvaged glazing, the wooden frame, the cloth or quilted batting for the night cover, and the simple wooden cleats that hold the cover in place. They priced it again in 2022 after lumber and glass had jumped, and the number rose to $61. Still under what most families spend on a single tank of propane in February. What strikes me about the original Yoder design is how unbothered it is by precision. He did not specify thicknesses to the millimeter. He wrote in plain Pennsylvania Dutch script that the stone wall should be as thick as a man's forearm is long. He wrote that the air gap behind the glass should be roughly the width of 4 fingers. He wrote that the night cover should be heavy enough that a child could not lift it easily, but light enough that a woman could raise it with one hand and a pulley. These are not the instructions of an engineer. They are the instructions of someone who expected ordinary people with ordinary tools in ordinary kitchens and barns to build this thing and have it work. And it did work. Records from the Yoder farm, kept by his wife Mary Yoder in a separate ledger, now held at the Heritage Historical Library in Aylmer, Ontario, show that between 1,924 and 1,931, the family burned 43% less firewood than their neighbors of comparable household size. 43%. In a region where a cord of wood meant 2 days of a man's labor to cut and split, that was not a modest savings. That was the difference between a hard winter and an easy one. I want to address something directly, because I know some of you are thinking it. You are thinking, if this is so simple, so cheap, so effective, why has no mainstream builder adopted it? Why is it not in every home magazine? Why did your contractor never mention it when you renovated? The answer is uncomfortable, and I am going to give it to you straight. In 1978, the United States Department of Energy commissioned a study on passive solar retrofits for existing homes. The study, conducted by researchers at Los Alamos National Laboratory under the direction of Dr. Douglas Balcom, evaluated several wall configurations, including one nearly identical to Yoder's design. The Trombe variation they tested, with night insulation, achieved a measured efficiency of 87% heat retention over a 12-hour overnight cycle. The report was published. It sits in government archives. It was never promoted. It was never turned into a consumer guide. It was never adapted for mass market construction. Instead, the industry moved toward high-efficiency furnaces, then heat pumps, then smart thermostats, each requiring a service contract, each tied to a utility bill, each generating recurring revenue for someone who was not you. Dr. Balcom himself, before he passed away in 2019, gave an interview to Solar Today magazine in which he expressed quiet frustration that his work on passive thermal mass had been, in his words, treated as a curiosity rather than a solution. He pointed out that a properly built thermal wall could reduce a home's heating load by 60 to 70% in temperate climates, and that the payback period on materials was often less than 2 winters. 2 winters. After that, every cold night the wall worked, it was working for free. Now let me give you the practical sequence, because I do not want you to leave this video with inspiration but no plan. First, identify your south-facing wall. In the northern hemisphere, that is the wall that gets sun from roughly 9 in the morning until 3 in the afternoon during the shortest days of the year, December and January. Stand outside on a sunny December day around noon and watch where the light falls hardest on your house. That is your wall. Second, measure it. You need at least 60 square feet of unshaded surface to make this worth doing. If a tree blocks it, the tree wins, and you need a different wall or a different plan. Third, source your mass. Concrete blocks painted matte black work. Salvaged brick works. Stacked stone works. The Amish often used whatever was abandoned in nearby fields or torn down from collapsing outbuildings. Fourth, source your glazing. Old storm windows from estate sales, twin wall polycarbonate from a greenhouse supply, even doubled layers of clear poly sheeting stretched on a frame. The Yoder design used single pane glass with a tight night cover, and it still hit 92% retention because the cover did the heavy lifting after sundown. Fifth, build the night cover. This is the piece almost every modern Trombe imitator skips, and it is the piece that matters most. Quilted moving blankets sewn together, rigid foam board faced with fabric, even a simple wooden shutter lined with wool. Hinge it at the top, weight it at the bottom, rig a cord and cleat so you can raise it at sunrise and lower it at sunset. That single sentence Yoder wrote has stayed with me ever since. Men forget what their hands once knew. We have spent the last 100 years forgetting how to heat our own homes. We have outsourced something as fundamental as warmth to companies that have no obligation to us beyond the next monthly bill. And the knowledge of how to do it ourselves, with a dark painted panel, a piece of glass, and a hinged insulated cover, has been quietly preserved by communities that the rest of us have dismissed as backward. The Amish are not backward. They are the last people in America who never let go of the knowledge that the rest of us were tricked into surrendering. They never paid an electric bill to stay warm. They never had a furnace fail in the middle of January. They never had to choose between paying the heating bill and paying for groceries. They built their walls right, they covered them at night, and they let the sun do what the sun has always done. You can do this. This weekend, with less than $70 in materials, a Saturday afternoon of work, and the simple discipline of raising and lowering an insulated panel twice a day during the winter months. You will feel the wall warm under your hand by the third day. You will watch your heating bill drop by the end of the first month. You will tell your children and your grandchildren that you finally figured out something that should have been obvious all along. What you just learned is not new. It is just old enough that almost everyone forgot. And the people who profited from your forgetting are not going to be happy that you remembered. If you are the kind of person who believes that real knowledge has been quietly pushed aside to protect someone else's profit, you already know what to do next. I want to ask you something specific. The night cover that Samuel Yoder sketched in 1923, the one that brought heat retention up to 92%, do you have a south-facing wall on your house where you could install one this weekend? Tell me in the comments. Tell me what your wall looks like, what direction it faces, what your winter heating bill ran last year. Do not just watch this and move on. Leave a comment. This audience needs to hear from each other, because what we are doing here is not just learning, it is remembering together. Subscribe, not for me, so you stay on the list of people who refuse to forget. Every week I dig up another piece of forgotten Amish wisdom that someone, somewhere decided you were not supposed to have. The next video covers a forgotten food preservation method from a 1908 Mennonite household manual that keeps vegetables fresh for 9 months without a freezer, without canning jars, and without electricity. You will not believe what they buried in their backyards. The $50 wall is yours now. The night cover is yours now. Samuel Yoder's notebook is yours now. Use it, build it, tell someone else. The forgetting stops with us.